Welcome to 21st Century Saints Live. We are a podcast and live stream series for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the British Isles and around the world. Those who are affiliated with us or adjacent to Mormonism in any way, this podcast is for you. As you can all see, this is not Alana. Alana's not here. We have standing in our curly girl, we have the wonderful Mormon Civil Wars host, Peter Bleakley. Do you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I'm sorry Alana's not well, and I'm much less beautiful. But we're not about shallow values here, hopefully. So you'll have to put up with me.
Well, I'm a little bit shallow, so I'm just gonna, we miss you, Alana, and you are the love of my life, as well as my showbiz wife. But I'm just gonna spill. So Alana is on the chat. She is keeping an eye on you all tonight to make sure you're all behaving. So do come by and say hi. But Alana's poorly, and obviously, you know, if you've been watching the show for a while, you'll know that Alana has her allergies get really bad at this time of the year, and she's coughing a lot. And so we had birthday weekend there. It's Alana's milestone birthday, so everyone say happy birthday to our girl online. And
30, I presume 30 milestone.
Exactly. It may be younger, but yeah. Lovely milestone birthday, and she partied so hard that she has her throat is just gone, and she's come like crawling out of this weekend with tattoos and can't speak. So so sympathy, but also contextual sympathy. So we love you. I'm gonna get well soon.
She's having her post-faith crisis meltdown experience. It's a rite of passage.
Absolutely, and she's rocking it.
Hats and you get off your face for a while and then you calm down a bit.
She's rocking it, and her tattoo is cracking good. Just, so for all of the family members who don't know that Alana got a tattoo, Alana has a tattoo. I'm happy to out any member of the church who needs me to be outed to their family. Anyway, we have so much to talk about tonight, Peter, and I'm so glad that you are. I am so glad that you're here with us, even though I miss Alana, because we're going to talk a little bit of history, and you have a background in history, right?
I teach art mainly, but I'd be teaching history if I wasn't teaching art. I'm an amateur history enthusiast, let's say.
The best kind. So I want to kick off tonight. First of all, I really want to do a quick shout out and thanks to. We have had a very generous donor to the podcast, and I just want to say thank you so much. We are putting your donation to very good use, and we love you and appreciate you. So thank you so much. So if anyone wants to get in touch with ideas for how we can improve, just let us know. Just get in touch. We now have a social media manager who's come on board with us that we are really excited to introduce to you all, and we have got some incredible guests lined up for the next couple of weeks. So we are really excited about all of this. These are shows that you are going to want to share. So I'm really excited about it. Okay. This week in Mormonism, Peter, what's been happening? What's the big news?
It's kind of like every week in Mormonism. So the big announcement that kind of appeared on the blog and Accor, but also a lot of people got emails. Like my wife got an email straight away about it, is announcing some changes to how General Conference is going to function. And as far as I can work out, they're basically going to cancel the priesthood and Relief Society sessions. They didn't use that term. They just said the Saturday evening session will be no more, because they don't like to say things how they are. It's always sort of couched in vague fogginess. But basically what it means is they're no longer going to have a priesthood session of conference and a Relief Society one. So the recent history of this is we used to have both. The Relief Society one, there was this huge hoo-ha a year or two ago about whether we count the lady one as an actual conference session.
Yes.
And it was this great breakthrough when they actually called, or someone, or at least one of the apostles called it a session of conference, because there's just this firewall between lady stuff and priesthood stuff, which obviously counts, and the lady stuff doesn't really. So it seems like things were going great guns for that. Then they decided to alternate them. So we'd have a women's conference session, one of the 6 monthly conferences, and then a priesthood one, the others. There's the ongoing frustration, of course, that in the women's sessions of conference, most of the speakers are men. They have the whole first presidency line up and take the last 3 talks. So women have a very small voice. But without that, as happened in April, which is the priesthood session turn, they had 2 women speakers out of 34 or 35. So there's lots of ways to look at this change. We might have different views on it. I don't know, but
yeah, let's dig into those views a little bit, because I am seeing a lot of very mixed feelings about these changes. And normally, what kind of happens is we've got the people who tend to be very orthodox, who, any announcement, it's like, this is, I have the testimony of this the moment that I heard about it. Then you've got other people who are like, okay, what does this mean? And then you've got other people who are just like, okay, right, more changes, this is no biggie. Tell me, how do you experience, I guess, the priesthood session of conference? How traditionally have you experienced that?
I think in the past, when we used to actually gather, when it wasn't online, and I think this is one of the reason they gave for this change, or the spin on it, is now that we don't gather, we watch stuff online. There's kind of no point having a space that's just for the men or just for the women, and the others aren't invited, So that boundary got blurred already. You used to be able to read the talks from both in the Ensign anyway, so it wasn't like people were being kept out. But it was kind of exciting. I think growing up as a young adult and as an Aaronic priesthood holder as a teenager, it felt like this is the male space, this is the special one that I get to be in. And in a way, we have some of that anyway, in that we have gendered church, that we have separate priesthood and relief society lessons and so on. So it did feel kind of interesting, exciting. It felt relevant. It felt like, and I actually love this. I think it's important to have gendered spaces, not all the time. And we got major work to do with equality on all kinds of fronts, obviously. I think the big moment that came for me with that, because on the other hand, it seems so bad as well. Like I've taught RE for several years. In a Muslim mosque, usually women aren't encouraged to go to the mosque and pray, but if they do turn up, they've got a little side room to go in. And Jewish synagogues in the more traditional wing are similar. And so, that's not right, and it's not comfortable. But something that kind of got me thinking very differently about all this was when I was at university. The Christian Union hosted in the chapel on campus a really interesting presentation by some Christian feminists. So this is early 1990s, and I think I've still got my pressed flower to prove that I was there, that they were giving to everyone. And it was very interesting. They were talking about the experience of women in really the Church of England and Catholicism, the larger Christian church. And they were advocating for having female-only spaces, that in a system that has been extremely patriarchal for centuries, thousands of years, and given lots of negative or second-class messages to women, that to actually part of the healing process and the empowering process that women would need to go to, they were saying, would be to create female-only spaces to worship and talk together and be women and feel their power, and then kind of reintegrate from a position of that inner strength with men and the rest of the community moving forward. And as I was sitting there, and this is when I was still feeling very idealistic about everything we do in the church, and not realizing we're not quite as brilliant as I thought, But on a positive, I was like, oh, that's Relief Society. We already do this. We're doing what the Christian feminists want. We've created a female-only space with female leaders and empowering women, and where they speak and explore their spirituality in their own way. And I think, and men get to do that as well in the male-only space. A couple of other perspectives on this. One is that during the COVID lockdown, there's been lots of soul searching and thinking about, well, what do we do at church? What are we missing? Is there anything we should change when we go back? And some of the consensus has been that actually women are not going to be that keen to rush back, because too often, particularly if you've got young children, Sunday for women is a grueling slog. They're usually the ones actually paying attention to organizing the kids to get them in the car and out the door. Often the father of the family, if there is one, is at a meeting already in the morning, so they're kind of left on their own to wrangle the kids and get them there. And the man might be up on the stage, so she's left alone dealing with the kids during the meetings. And it's, it tends to be the Sundays are extremely busy for women. It's grueling. They don't get much of a breather. They are running the more difficult childcare operations through primary and nursery, although increasingly, particularly in America, where they've got lots of people, there's a lot of men stepping up to be involved in those, which is cool. I've taught in primary. That was a blast. And whereas, and what sort of dawns on me and some other men who are discussing this is actually it's going to be the men who miss the male space in their priesthood lesson, because as non-alcoholic spiritual Christian men, we get no space in our normal lives to get together and talk with other men about our lives, about the things that matter, about deep spiritual matters. Women tend to be much more social, and they create, and it's part of normal society for women to do a lot of communicating and supporting each other. I'm not saying that's the case for all women, but there just are ways that society tends to work that give women a lot of opportunity to give that support to each other and have those conversations.
Yeah, and we're going to speak to the female experience in a moment, but I'm really intrigued about, because I've asked this question before, does the elders quorum or previous to that, whatever quorum you were in, are you having the same or similar experience as you would get with Relief Society when you're sort of having this? This is the time with your sisters. Are you, how is that being experienced? And I'm specifically thinking also, but maybe the rite of passage of getting to sort of age 12, whatever you're gonna.
Yeah, and that's much more, obviously defined for young men because they get to be in with the adults, whereas young women don't join Relief Society till they're 18. I think I do think it's an important space for us, and we have positive experiences, because the only alternative in our culture is to go to the pub. You have those conversations if you spend several evenings a week at the pub. You get there, you shoot the breeze, you talk about life and politics, and you might get drunk and open up about some deep stuff and have a cry. But there's no. But if you're too busy with your church callings and you don't go to pubs anyway, there is no place in our society for men to get together and have those conversations about anything deep and meaningful. And there's a lot of attention in the efforts to improve men's mental health and health to do with the idea that men just don't get to talk about stuff. They don't get to talk about their feelings, and that contributes to them having a much higher suicide rate and being much slower to get to a doctor if they've got cancer and stuff. So creating those kinds of spaces is actually really important for the mental and physical health of men. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at this, and what if it's done well, what can be provided with that. I enjoy it. I do, don't tell anyone, but it is quite nice to get away from the women sometimes. They can be hard work. And men are like, we don't want to overanalyze everything. It's sounding really sexist, but this is a positive of being male boys. We like to be in a space where we just get it, where we don't have to over explain everything, where you don't have to talk and talk and talk and talk. And in the way that women tend to think and communicate and all that. Sometimes it's nice just to be a caveman and not be judged for it. So there are, however you want to look at that is a nice space to be in. Another way to look as a teacher, where you were talking about, that rite of passage aspect. As a teacher, we study quite, and I teach at a boys' school, so we study quite a lot about male psychology and learning and so on. And most cultures have worked out that the way to civilize boys is to induct them into a hierarchical system where you tell them at age 12, you are now a man and you have responsibilities, and you gradually civilize them by giving increasing levels of responsibility. And by doing and practical, rather than thinking and talking, by action and doing, you train them to be a civilized adult who could be a father in your tribe one day. Whereas the general consensus is that women kind of sort themselves out because they talk to each other a lot, and they pass on that culture and wisdom to each other through conversation, through gossip, conversation, empathy, getting together with your girlfriends and talking things through. And that for male psychology, it tends to work better to have an action, a doing, a job. And when I got my head around that, I really started to frame having a male priesthood as a way to kind of con the little knuckle dragging cavemen boys into doing female stuff, into learning female skills. The priesthood, for a start, teaches them to give food to other people, to pass the sacrament. And for some of them, that's revolutionary because they're used to women waiting on them and feeding them. So to prepare and to give out food and clean up afterwards and clean up chapels, and home teaching makes you go and sit and listen to people and learn conversation skills and empathy. The whole system, if you want to look at it that way, is actually an ancient system for civilizing males and making them socially responsible. That in a way girls don't necessarily need, because they kind of do it anyway socially.
I have never heard that expressed, and I find it fascinating. So thank you for that. I mean, my sort of at times when I felt sort of frustrated at how perhaps people who hold the priesthood or have held the priesthood have come across, there can be this sort of great white savior, attitude that you take through because you have special knowledge. And my experience had been sort of a wariness of, I think whenever you set a bunch of boys into a classroom at whatever age and teach them that, you're all going to be gods. That is powerful stuff. So I like how teaching these, I suppose, softer skills is sort of, you can see why a lot of men are expressing that they're going to miss priesthood session. For me, I think gendered experience of church had been really important to me also. That said, I feel like it has to be, you had used a word, empowering, and often Relief Society doesn't feel empowering. And what's been really interesting is throughout the pandemic, I've been able to see so many female spaces opening up and doing not doing Relief Society online, although sometimes that's been an incredible experience, but doing women gathering and speaking to our experiences. And that has been how Relief Society could work at its very, very finest. And that's exciting and stimulating. And we do need to have discussions about, what does a gendered experience mean for people who don't fit within those gender categories? Is it possible?
I'm not saying this is perfect system by any means, and it is not equal. There's a lot of, because I've just given like the best spin I can for justifying a male priesthood. It is a bit of a trick to civilize the teenage boys, and I became patient with it because I'm like, why can't we just meet with the women? Why are we having these separate things? Why they're so wise? I'd love to be listening to what they're saying actually, as well. But then I thought, well, there is a Christian concept of catering to the least of these. The people in most need to have the priority. And there are, I mean, seriously, there are a lot of teenage boys who are just animals. They really are. They are lazy. They are aggressive. The hormones are carbonating their brains. They won't have a sensible thought for several years during their teenage years. And I'm saying this from experience. I've taught literally thousands of them. This is universal, or very common, let's say. And if this system works for them and makes them less dangerous to someone they might one day be married to, okay, let's have a male-only space. Let's play this game with them. Let's give them this status that we're not giving the girls, which is outrageous. I mean, the church has even erased the women's names. I just keep having flashbacks to all the time now to Handmaid's Tale, which is, honestly, I can't recommend anything more from my point of view anyway, to switch you on to the gendered issues within our religion and culture than watch the Handmaid's Tale series, because it's creepy, because so much of it is only 1 or 2 steps beyond what we do and what we say and what we teach. And that just, you can't then hear it again at church and not be horrified. So I've gone on that journey as well. But they've taken their names away. They've the beehives, the MIAs, the whatever, the Maids. Now they've literally not given them a name. Now you could argue this is a secret transition towards just having them ordained. We're going to ordain women and they will be deacons, teachers, and priests. But which may be the agenda. That's how the leadership of the church work. If they want a big change, they do it in tiny baby steps over about 50 years. But they've left them without a name. They've made the young women nameless. So the young men still have these steps to go through. I am a deacon. I am a teacher. I'm a priest. I know where I stand. The stage I'm at has recognition in my community. We have a name, and they've literally made them nameless. I mean, what do they even call them now? It's something like just class. I don't know. Do you know what they're calling?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm serving in the Young Women's Organisation at the moment, and yeah, it's just young women, just young women, and we are so small we don't really have to refer to breaking up different age groups, so it's not quite so big a deal, but I mean, it's something that's very, very on my mind, because we now have a wonderful individual in our family who is non-binary and had been enjoying coming to Young Women's and having that experience, but to keep hearing young women, girls, all the girls. It's so nice that you're all together, girls. It's so nice to see you here, girls. Young women, you're wonderful. That it was painful. And I feel, I personally, although I am loving the experience, or I think it's important to have gendered spaces, I would be fine with them being merged probably, but I would love to see the youth programme merged. And when you talk about, you'd mentioned your experience of being taught by women. I mean, really, does that happen? How many times can you remember I mean, okay, we're not going to maybe mention sacrament speakers, because that's going to happen a little bit more often. But when do you actually get taught in that dialogue with a woman? We're quite lucky in our ward. We've had wonderful women Sunday school teachers. But when it comes to priesthood and Relief Society, normally it's going to be priesthood who are going to take that, in my experience. And it's something that it's very, very relevant to me right now, because we just have a new ward presidency, a new ward bishopric, and it's such an exciting time. Like, people are really excited. We've got a great bunch of people here, but one of the phrases in The Handmaid's Tale that was used, I think, in the most recent season was when our protagonist asks, "Do you want to take away my voice?" And this past week, I've been having dreams where I'm asking my church leaders that question: "Do you want to take away my voice?" And then we heard the announcement that we're not going to have women's session of conference. and it just kind of hit home a little bit.
I think that's what it is. It can't be seen as anything else. I mean, they've been embarrassed a bit by Kate Kelly's campaign to just have some women turn up and ask if they could come into the priesthood session and just be in the audience, and the internet kind of made that happen anyway. But and where, you know, there aren't any women who speak in the priesthood session of conference normally, but every single one will have a line of senior apostle men lecturing the women. You know, it is not even slightly equal. So they already didn't have much of a voice in their own session. So it is, I think this is terrible. I think it's symbolic to have a women's session in conference. And we'd only just got over that line. As I was saying, it was only a year or two ago that they even started calling it an official session of conference. That was hailed as a moment of equality for women, or some step towards that in the church. And now the whole thing has been erased. And the reality is the generic space, the shared space, is nearly always a priesthood space. The men do most of the talking, and it's all about man stuff and their agenda and how they view the world. And there are, of course, other issues about, well, the women that get appointed and speak are often not great advocates for women's needs either, you know, and that's why they've been trusted with the job. They'll just parrot what the men say. And some of their talks have been horrendous. You know, particularly Joy D. Jones in the April 21 conference, where she told parents to train the kids to argue with teachers. Thanks, Joy. You complete.
I think that was one of the
that
latest.
was outrageous. You know, and so many things very wrong with that talk. So just, you know, women aren't robots. They're women with lots of different opinions. They can be just as difficult to listen to as some of the men. You know, but the symbolism. But the symbolism of it, and I think, and what was really interesting happening in the same month was the women's conference at BYU,
which
had some terrible moments, but it's one of those moments that you've described where the women can set the agenda. And the Recited Presidency stood there with a sister who identified as queer, and she talked about her experience, and they emphasized teaching acceptance and love and inclusion, and we're all sinning at something. If you think she's a sinner, you know, the priority for church should be just welcome people and love them and deal, you know, that's what it's about. Let them have their own journey. So when women can take control of the agenda, they can do that. I mean, my mum was kind of the feminist icon of my life. You know, she served from a young age in Stake and Relief Society and primary, and was in public affairs regionally and all kinds of things. So very much a voice for women, and quite assertive with it. And she just, I said she wouldn't say it that way, but she basically regarded correlation when the priesthood took over Relief Society and took away its independence in the 1950s. As it was like mass female genital mutilation. It removed their autonomy. It took away their voice. It took away their control of their own budget. It took away the control of their own lesson and teaching resources. They used to be formulated and created by female leaders. They were proactive. It was a relief society. And all of it got brought under the priesthood yoke with correlation. And ever since, women have been second-class citizens in our church, in my view, anyway, in all kinds of ways.
And if
and
men,
this is another,
if men had the opportunity, I think, to be able to hear what is being, without filters, to hear what is being said and felt by the women, and we're not making assumptions. And also the other problematic thing about Relief Society, we're not speaking to what we think needs to be said, what we think is acceptable through that male priesthood holding lens. I mean, the BYU conference, if you could have heard the rejoicing, I mean, we're online, and women are speaking to the relief and the excitement of what is possible. We're getting to see a glimpse of a future church. We're seeing a Relief Society presidency who get their sleeves rolled up and they're serving, and we want to have those experiences reflected in our classes, and we need to talk about that. And we're not really getting to talk about it because we're very sort of specific on what we're discussing on a Sunday or in our online spaces. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
And I think another shift that happened was, which has disadvantaged men as well, is when Priesthood and Relief Society just became another Sunday school class. When they stopped having a specific manual about women's roles and responsibilities and opportunities, and one for the men, the priesthood are not trained anymore. We got a whole bunch of priesthood who do not know what they're doing, who don't get any training about how to perform ordinances. There are almost zero discussions now about being a parent, about being a father, about being a husband, framing a man's life in spiritual terms. So we think we're a patriarchal church that kind of has the man dominant and all that sort of thing, which they do in decision making. But there is no pastoral support anymore in our church for men being spiritual leaders. There's no sense anymore since those manuals went, and we're now for a decade, whatever, we were studying the modern prophets, and we had exactly the same manual. There's no point whatsoever having separate male and female space to do exactly the same manual. And you know what is the lesson material is no longer relevant to the gendered space that we still perpetuate, and it's just become a bit pointless, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, this is boring, let's get the women in here, at least we can have a better conversation about this same material and hear their perspective. Whereas it had a point when you had your priesthood manual, and it was about, and there was this sense, you know, and again, like when they announced home-based church supported by the church, they said nothing to the men. They laid nearly all of that responsibility on the women, these poor, overworked, already mothers and wives, just torn in 10 directions at once. They pretty much made clear that it was going to be mostly the women's responsibility to lead this home church thing. And there was I don't recall a single conversation or instruction or teaching about the man's role as a spiritual guide, as a leader, as having responsibility. And it just feels like we keep dumping on women. We take away their names, we take away their power, we take away their own control of the curriculum, and we just expect them to do more and more and more work. And I was really amazed by that, because we're not even doing patriarchy well. Like, we're not, if we can have men being patriarchs in the home, no one's told them for years what that even looks like. No one, there's no language about that. There's no teaching. There's no repeated message like we used to get in Elders Forum through those manuals. So we're in this very odd situation where the grassroots membership and the women, when they can speak, are so ahead of the game and open-minded and forward-thinking and planning for the future, and they've absorbed all the best that's going on in our wider society's progress towards tolerance and equality, which is essential, and God's work. Yet the decisions and the policies and the practices and the institutional tinkering of the leadership is taking away their voice, taking away their power more and more with each of these incremental things. And it feels like a noose is tightening around women's mouths. This is why I keep thinking of Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, same.
That they want and feel and can give so much, and they have fewer and fewer opportunities to be heard as significant equals to men. And removing women's conference from conference, I think, is outrageous. I think it's a mass silencing of women, which is what it will be unless they suddenly convince loads of apostles not to have a talk every conference, which they do at the moment, you know.
Now, that said, if we could get, you know, literally just thinking about this just now, if we ditched women's conference and didn't have to have that format be a handful of women will speak, followed up by the main act that, it's going to be the men.
The first
Um,
presidency. Yeah.
which is never gone unnoticed. And, let's face it, women are showing up wanting to hear from the prophet. However, we are in this female space. If that format is totally dumped and future formats looked like BYU Women's Conference there, that could be really interesting. Those are some exciting possibilities. But what I'm hearing about is sort of two main things. People who are expressing the desire for more female voices. Does this mean we will hear more from women in conference?
Yeah.
So if you give me your thoughts on that, but also the Ordained Women movement is being referenced quite a lot with regards to this. A few years ago, there were women queuing up asking to be admitted to priesthood session. So it moved online, and now this is sort of part of the reason that's been given for doing away with them. Well, you can see it all online anyway. So there's not really any need to sort of segregate these sessions. And I don't know, it made me feel a bit kind of sad that was how easy it was all along.
I thought, well, it depends whether they actually do this. You've got a whole vision of, well, let's make it better then. Let's have more women's voices.
Yes.
I don't trust them. I don't think that's their baseline instinct.
Yeah.
I really don't. I hope, and we'll find out in October, maybe there'll be 4 women out of 34 speaking.
Double?
Yeah,
Double?
exciting. Maybe 2 women will give a prayer. I mean, it's just pathetic. And unfortunately, the track record is not giving me. I hope. Prove me wrong. Come on, I'm doing reverse psychology, Jane. I don't think they'll let women speak in conference. They're just horrible sexist pigs.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll work. Probably won't, but it's worth a try.
Take that, Peter. Hear it all over.
But no, because they've just got such a sense of entitlement, and I think sometimes we have to. And what I've been trying to do in my podcast is stop projecting our hopes and dreams and values onto this system and these people. Let's just for a second switch that off and look at them, what they really are doing. Judge them, and we're taught, judge people by what you do. This is it doesn't matter if you tell me you've got faith. Show me your faith by your works. What do you actually do? What are your policies? What do you teach? What do you say? And I've been paying close attention to quite a few of the face-to-face presentations with the youth and the broadcasts they did to the young people of Europe and Africa recently. And the message over and over again is going back to the 1970s. They're saying, marry young, don't worry about money, just start having babies, because they panicked that the birth rates dropped and there's no other growth in the church right now. So they seem to think some kind of baby boom will save us, which it won't, because those babies all leave when they get older at the moment. So that's a bit pointless. But they're saying this, and they're only offering that as the route for women to marry young, drop out of education if you have to, is what really happens when they do that. And they're lying to them that God will just make a money tree appear to pay for it all. And they just said that to all the people in Africa, which many countries in Africa do not even have a welfare system. They lied. Elder Holland and the Young Women's President Bonnie Cordon both said we are poor. They said, oh, we were poor when we were kids at Brigham Young University, which was half the price of the average of cost of university in America, because the tithe payers of the world pay to subsidize it. We give each of those students, in effect, 15 grand a year. They don't have to pay back, so they can have affordable university education for 80% white Americans. That's the system those people went through. And they're like, oh, we struggled, but we survived. Yeah, because the rest of us were paying for it. Well, in our countries, we don't get 15 grand a year from the church for our university students. It's totally barking mad, usually, to get married and start having children while you're still at university. That would be insane. And ours are much cheaper than your ones. It's still quite expensive. you know, they're selling a model that they lived through themselves literally in the 1950s or 1940s in the case of the first presidency. That's how old they are. And they're not offering any alternatives. That's the only message they keep giving the young. Do what we did. But they leave out the fact that they could only do that because other people were paying for it. And they lie. He sat there and he got Bonnie to say the same. And we're still poor. We've still got no money. Ha ha ha. They are rich. Bonnie owns her own business. Her husband is a senior international tech executive. He gets 140 grand a year as the baseline salary for an apostle in our church, plus loads of other expenses. And he was a university president of BYU for donkey's years. They have wealth. They are plenty rich, especially compared to the young people of Europe and Africa, like actual Africa, they were saying this too. And sorry, I'm going off on one, but the point is that this is Handmaid's Tale level stuff. Yeah. They are selling a route for women of what their world should be, how they should make the most important decisions of their life, marriage and childbirth. And the data, which I've talked about in my podcast, is you are setting up women for a disaster. First of all, 50% of women in the church will never be able to marry in the temple because there aren't enough men. There are 100 women for every 70 men in the church. And if you assume, say, 20 of those 70 men are like, don't marry them, we know what they're like. Let's say we got a starting point of, if you match everyone up, 50% of women will be able to marry in the temple. If they follow the pattern being taught to them by the first presidency and these apostles, and marry young and start having babies immediately and don't care how much, who's going to pay for it, that immediately increases your likelihood of divorce. People who marry young and have children young have a far higher divorce rate than people who marry a bit older when they're more financially stable and don't have so many children so quickly. That's just a fact. So more than half of the women who marry in the temple and follow that pattern will get divorced. And when they come out of that, and women talk about this constantly in the blog and ACL, you know, thousands of women having this experience. It's a live thing going on right now. They find suddenly, well, I stopped doing my education and career because I was told to be a full-time mother of my 5 children. My husband carried on. He's fine financially now. He's going to go and remarry someone else. He will still have his status in church. You know, he might pay some alimony. I'm not saying that's always easy for the men, but what's she looking at? She's still got young children. She has to work around childcare. She's most likely to be the primary carer of the children, and her earning opportunities are massively reduced because she never finished her degree because she dropped out to have the babies. So this whole system is setting up women to fail and to be traumatized and to be let down, while constantly selling the idea that this is the only way for a woman to be truly happy. And it's worth all this sacrifice because your kids are going to grow up Mormon. But then they don't, because the church is not keeping our children. 80% of them leave. So there's even that is kind of not working at the moment. So there's so much we need to fix here. And it begins with empowering women to say no to this message. Yes. Be more sensible, to have control. I'll stop talking now and let the woman speak.
No, well, see, because I want to come on to the possibilities. Because, so, darling audience, how I love you. I want to just make really clear that you can find more of Peter's views on your Mormon Civil War podcast.
Yeah.
Occasionally, Peter, you frame things in a way that makes me feel like I'm going to have a nosebleed. I love your opinions and I'm thankful for them. So, but yeah, viewers, Peter says what he thinks. So, yeah, if it's you know, if your perception is that leaders are lying, then yeah, I know it's tough for people like me to hear, but I thank you for sharing your opinions.
And not necessarily lying, just that they believe this. This is what they did. Yeah. They're saying this worked for me, and with the best intentions, they want other people to have their life, because it is a very comfortable life. They've done well. We're paying for it. And we've paid for it since university, if they went to BYUs. So, it's in this case, I think they genuinely believe this is the way to go. And they're very much in their Utah bubble, and they think the rest of the world can replicate that. And they're just very unaware of the real financial and social situation that most of the international members are living in, and how expensive everything is.
And I think I'm sort of all about the sort of tact and wanting to do things very gently. And so we'll have a podcast where we'll speak about, Alana and I will speak about people's lived opinion, lived experiences. We'll share our opinions and how we're experiencing church in the 21st century. So I guess I just really want to emphasize, just thank you for your voice. I know that it can be tough to hear, but thank you for that. So a 21st century church, at times it feels like we are still, okay, I think if we were in the 19th century, we would be experiencing a radical church. This would be exciting, new, dynamic, and somehow we're experiencing what wasn't even authentically the 19th century church, because that was kind of cool. So we're kind of behind on how things are. I don't know. I'm thinking about the experience this month of this is Pride Month. Happy Pride to our viewers. I got to sort of see some of the experiences of what church was like this Sunday for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And, it's testimony time. It's all lovely. Ish. So later that night, I got to sit online with a bunch of guys who were doing online worship from Community of Christ. And they opened up by talking about Pride, celebrating Pride Month, welcoming everyone to come to Christ's table. They also talked about how they need to be better. And I'm listening to this bunch of people really doing it. And what was so cool about this is my non-binary kid had their first experience of church simply because they were in the kitchen while I'm listening to this, while I'm experiencing this. And their first experience of church was, hey, it's Pride. We need to do better. How can we do better? And let's be more welcoming. And Community of Christ chapels all over America, I'm seeing sort of pictures of pride flags outside, and it's just lovely. And I see possibilities. Could we perhaps go maybe a little bit back into history and talk about how gender, let's talk about a famous person from church history, and how they challenged gender roles of the time. Would you take us through that?
I think that would be great. So one of Brigham Young's many polygamous children was Brigham Morris Young, and he was a really interesting chap. He served a mission in Hawaii. He married one of Lorenzo Snow's daughters and raised a family. They went with their young children to serve another mission in Hawaii. And when he came back, he spent the next sort of decade or two with a career on the stage and in drag. So it was part of the vaudeville tradition in America, quite similar to the tradition in Britain that we still carry on in our pantomimes every year, where there's a lot of cross-dressing in British pantomimes, which is like beyond the comprehension of most Americans to understand this part of our culture. You have these fairy stories like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty or Aladdin, and it's a big thing. You take your kids to it. Each town will have a big panto on, and they do a huge show, and it's like part of Christmas that you go and see this year's pantomime, and it will have minor celebrities taking on different roles. And often the lead male character, Robin Hood or whoever, will be played by a woman in this tradition. And you always have what's called the panto dame, who is a woman who might be the mother or the fairy godmother or whatever, who will always be played by a man, overacting and hamming it up with an amazing dress. And we actually had our local panto dame come and speak to our children at my school and talk about his role and how he does that. And he took that opportunity to sort of challenge some gender stereotypes and just talk about, you know, how he creates this persona as his career. Which was fascinating, wonderful.
And I played Jack
Hey,
back in the day.
back in the
I played
beanstalk.
Jack.
There you go.
We did some time going round the schools too, and being out in the playground while these little girls are coming over saying, "Jack's my best friend." I mean, it's so normal. It's just not a thing.
Yeah. So we in our culture in Britain, we have a big place in our culture, in our hearts, for drag queens, basically, for men who are very camp and hamming it up with female characteristics. It's just part of our culture, and it's not seen as threatening. Historically, it kind of dates from Shakespeare's time, where traveling actors would have to fight. There's no police. If people want to attack your traveling troupe on the way to the next town, you have to get a sword out and kill them. So there was no way it was safe for women to be actresses. So all the female roles would be played by men. So this is kind of an aftershock of that long tradition in theatre in Europe. So vaudeville then is kind of it's basically a variety show, and you have your traditions within it. You know, you'll have a serious love song, you'll have a comedy act, you might have some clowns. And one of the most popular ingredients would be a man dressed as a woman performing and singing. And Brigham Morris Young was great at this. He had a fantastic falsetto voice, and he performed. I'm going to try a screen share. So I'm going to click share just so we can have a look at the full glory of Brigham Young's son. Here we go. And I'm going to pop him up there. Can you see Madame Petrini? Is that working?
So I can't, but if our audience in the chat could let us know if you all can see that. I believe the people watching live can see it. So for our podcast viewers, if you could do the visual explanation for our podcast listeners.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So basically, we have Brigham Morris Young dressed up as a woman. His wonderful Victorian clothing, late 1800s, and looking glam basically. And this is one of the publicity photos. So this was Morris's stage persona as Madame Petrini, and his Mormon audiences loved it. No one felt threatened by it. No one was boycotting it. There was no, the LGBTQ agenda is coming for our families and all of that sort of thing. And the culture then just wasn't so uptight about such things, let's say, in the ways that. So I think one of the big lessons to learn from that is actually how modern intense homophobia is in many ways in our culture. It's something that has been created by some movements within Christianity, particularly politicized evangelical Christianity in America. It's just because it seems like the norm or a baseline state of mind. It's really important to learn the history of all of this, that people used to be much less uptight about people expressing their gender identity differently, let's say. Now, I'm not saying that everyone was okay with homosexuality, but in a lot of places it simply wasn't illegal till more recently. A lot of the laws making homosexual relationships a punishable crime were not there since the Middle Ages. They were quite recent. It was when people got kind of obsessive and puritanical 150 years ago or 100 years ago. And I think part of deconstructing entrenched homophobia and transphobia is to understand that it's about returning to a more tolerant state of mind that has been around longer than the intolerant one. It's not about changing the world with something brand new that never happened before. And of course, we can compare that with the rules for road shows all the time when I was growing up. They always made very clear to make strictly clear to everyone that there was to be no cross-dressing in any church teenager road shows and no masks. You could not put a mask on. And again, this is part of
Yes.
the Christian evangelical Bible Belt hysteria, that they had all this. The first I ever heard of this was at Christian Union with some quite happy clappy Pentecostals at university. They had this whole idea of, like, if you put that mark, you shouldn't have an African mask on the wall in your house because it might have evil spirits in it. And you certainly shouldn't wear one because the devil can take over your persona. I mean, it's just superstitious, utter nonsense. I've got loads of African masks on my wall. I'm not going to risk moving the camera, but I don't know, where are they? There's some up there. And it was, and it's and again, it's important to just learn the history of these ideas. Where did they come from? How did they begin? How did they get perpetuated? Why was it Mormons out of the blue started talking this language? And it was part of this journey of trying to fit in more with assertive Protestant Christianity in America, as Mormons tried to be less countercultural. We used to be the wild polygamous sex cults that lived communally and did communism in the mountains. So they were desperate to re-image themselves as mainstream Christian Americans, patriotic, safe, nuclear family oriented, monogamous. And unfortunately in doing that, and face cards are evil, as Doug's just you put up there. There was so much of this superstition that they just borrowed wholesale from the evangelical Christians who hated us. I mean, this was the irony. As when I was a kid, the Christians who hated Mormons and propagandized against us and harassed our missionaries and sent speakers around the place to demonize us and make people terrified of Mormons were these evangelical Christians, the born-again factions, the Pentecostal wing. And yet these are the people that our leaders decided to wholesale borrow attitudes from because they seemed powerful. And what's interesting now is they are now losing their kids just as fast as we are. They're in absolute panic in America. The American evangelicals churches are emptying of their children just as much as we are now. It's a failed model, and it was a big mistake to go for that, in my opinion.
So we did have a few problems. Most people couldn't see the image, okay. So hopefully that's sharing now. If not, we will put links in the show notes. If you Google her name will come up.
So Madame Patarini, Pattarini, or just Brigham Young's cross-dressing son works, or it's Brigham Willard Young. Is it Willard? Yes.
But he also he has got an interesting link. So first of all, I didn't know.
Sorry, I'm getting that wrong.
Apparently,
Morris.
Morris. Apparently, there was a gin brand which is named after him, which I did not know.
Yes.
Which I thought was really cool. And so I think it's madampatrini.com has got some lovely cool history about him there. But there is a cool link from him in our church organization history. This is not just another random kid of Brigham Young who took to the stage. He founded the Young Men's Organization, right?
Yes. So after his first mission to Hawaii, he came back and with two other people was asked to organize the Young Men's Improvement Association, the YMIA. So I mean, Mormon history, everybody. Just forget what's in the Come Follow Me manual this year. That is just utterly boring and doesn't even begin to touch the joy that is there. True Mormon history is a wild smorgasbord of the completely unexpected. It's a Wild West script you could not make up. It is extraordinary and wonderful and absolutely bonkers, which is why, of course, they've tried to suppress it and whitewash it so hard. They have worked so hard to hide all this stuff, but it's out there now. There are podcasts. My favorite is a podcast called Naked Mormonism. Naked Mormonism is just mind-boggling. It is by his surname is Blankenegg or something. One of my favorite names in
Bryce
Mormonism.
Blankenegg. Yes, that is a
Yes,
great name. Yeah.
he's fantastic, and so I just can't recommend that enough. Just to get a grip on what was really going on, and it is completely different to like everything we were told. But if the church can just embrace this, let's just own it. Let's learn from our leaders' mistakes, and so on. Someone's just mentioned the Alpha course, so I'll respond to that. I used to teach it, interestingly, haha.
Ah.
So the yeah, just this amazing history. And I've been, for my sort of episode 6E of my podcast, I've been really taking a deep dive into the speeches of Hugh B. Brown, who was kind of Utah Canadian president of the British Mission. And he was adamant about the things that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young taught, that our purpose in the church is to learn and learn and learn, to learn from everyone, and to be open to discussing anything with anyone. If they can prove us wrong, we need to kiss their feet and thank them for proving us wrong, because we need to get rid of that wrong belief or idea and replace it with a better, truer one. And it's this fearless approach to knowledge, to research, to the future. And his basic point was, our journey is to become like God. We've got this much bigger view in Mormonism than other Christians. For them, all you need to know is Jesus saved you, and feel that love, you're done, you're in. That's all, that's the journey. For us, you need to learn all about everything, because one day you can be running planets with history and politics and science and all of that, and you need to know how to make those things. So he was basically saying, it's really arrogant to think we know everything now, or that we've worked it all out. And to treat Mormonism as a tradition that's never changed, which is, you know, it's changed. Every major doctrine in Mormonism has changed over the years when you do the history research. But to treat our religion as a tradition, we must fight the world over and never change and never let up on our homophobia and our racism and our sexism. You know, we go, oh, it's all part of the gospel. It's nonsense. He was saying we have no idea how wrong we are at the moment. So we must keep an open mind to taking further steps. And I've just been like, this guy was talking in the 1950s. He and I'm framing that as the Christian Mormonism. That was the big idea that I grew up on. And it is in conflict, and always has been, with people who would fight that, who would say that you can't, that you can't embrace what people are learning in the future. We've got to hide it. We must keep our children off the internet. They mustn't read these books. They mustn't listen to the scientists. President Nelson doesn't believe in evolution. He's on the record as saying he doesn't believe in organic evolution. I mean, that's significant, because Hugh B. Brown's big fight was with the same battle. At BYU, the science teachers teaching evolution, which is a fact, and framing it in a positive way for Mormons, were under incredible pressure, and a lot of them were being fired. And I think that's like the struggle going on at BYU today. There's a big conflict between people who've believed the science about sexuality and gender identity, and you've got a huge reaction against that, and it's fighting at the moment.
Yeah.
And there are factions, and there are people calling for faculty at BYU to be sacked because they're LGBTQ tolerant. So it's the same struggle. It's kind of shifted topic from evolution to sexuality and gender identity, but it's the same ideological struggle. This is why I call my podcast Mormon Civil War. It's just alive and kicking. It really is. And it will kill us if we don't have the right side win, because at the moment, people I think are the wrong side are winning, and our children are leaving. They're not going to stay in a sexist church. They're not going to stay in a homophobic church. They're not going to stay in a racist church. They're just not. So when you're talking about the future, we have to take these steps. Yeah.
And this is what brings me back to the changes for General Conference, because one thing that really excites me is that I think if we can get our heads around the fact that we can be and should be a listening church. I believe, I worship a listening God. That if there are needs, that our church can respond to those needs. We claim that. So when last year the church sends out surveys quite regularly. When last year the church sent out surveys to particularly young single adults, and they were asked about conference sessions. Would you be more likely to watch conference if there were fewer sessions? And the answer was a resounding, well, yes, we would. And so seeing this change as a response to what the needs of the people are, it's really interesting. As much as we can mourn the change, it's maybe not something, there's all these problems. It's actually, there are more possibilities, I think.
But why have they knocked off these sessions?
Why?
Because
Yeah,
they could have knocked off one of the other ones that are just the generic men standing up and taking their turns to give a talk. Why did they? There was no reason that culling some of the sessions of conference would mean you cull the different interesting ones that have a different dynamic. It's just now going to be the same, and then the same, and then the same, and then the same. And so they've slipped into this idea of, oh, we're listening to the people, but the actual, this is where I'm talking about not projecting our own idealism onto this. Yeah, Doug, I've had a couple. My wife gets them mostly. I'm really jealous. I'm like, oh, I try and persuade her to say what I want to say in her surveys, but she's like, no, I'm saying this myself. So I'm like, I want to do a survey.
And people are being really honest in these surveys. These are excellent.
Yes, which is great.
Yeah, and some.
But what do they do? So they've got the message. What does it end up being? They've got the message that priest and Relief Society lessons were getting very repetitive, which they were because they were recycling the same 4 manuals for decades. So, but in dealing with that, they then just gave everyone the same lesson, studying the teachings of a modern prophet. That kind of wasn't the answer. So they get their agenda in as a response to the need. People concerned about the Salt Lake Temple falling down in an earthquake. Okay, we'll repair it. We'll make it earthquake proof. But in doing so, President Nelson has decided to destroy the whole thing. The only thing that will remain of the interior of the pioneer mural-covered Salt Lake Temple is one staircase. That's it. He has destroyed it all after promising they would preserve it. And here we have again, oh, we're listening to the people to reduce the length of conference because it is a bit of a marathon, just like we reduce Sunday church. But what we'll do is we'll take out the female space. We'll take out the training of the priesthood. We'll make it all just them listening to us waffling on about our agenda more, or that's all there'll be. There'll be no variety now. So I agree with you that there may be possibilities if they do intentionally give women more of a voice or mix it up a bit. But why is it that every time in these situations, when they're claiming to be progressive, restoring the restoration, continuing the restoration, having revelations, each time it is silencing and destroying? It's destroying a pioneer temple. It is silencing women. It is every time it's clamping down more and more on this very authoritarian male-focused agenda. And I hope I'm wrong. It's all, if your audience are worried about me being nasty about the leaders, it's all reverse psychology. I'm hoping that they'll do the opposite of what I'm saying about them. But that is what they're doing. So I just think then, and for me, the reason I've kind of tipped over the edge and started podcasting and being so aggressive and blunt, frankly, in my criticisms of this situation is, for me, I've been on this journey for decades. This is something that's been a problem that my family is conscious of, that the church in Britain has been battered by, because there's hardly any of us left now, for decades. We're not starting afresh. This isn't year zero. This is the end game of a process of these behaviors by the leaders that has killed us and is increasingly silencing women. And in response, isn't it amazing that as soon as they get control of Zoom, the women have fought back? They have given, our state Relief Society presidency and the Romford State Relief Society presidency and others have done these gobsmackingly amazing firesides for the women, which I've sneakily listened into, that are like a progressive Mormon's dream come true, all about inclusion of LGBTQ people, including a transgender person speaking, and the mother of a gay young man who I know personally, good, who's grown up in the church. Both of them talking about their experience, having great speakers. They had the At Last She Said It
which is
podcast ladies
incredible. Mm.
do one of these firesides. They have found their voice, and they are sharing the knowledge and the joy and just getting on with it. And that is a tiny glimpse of what the women in the church could be doing if they were listened to, if they were given a space. Women were not
Yeah.
consulted for the family proclamation. It was presented to them as a finished product. They were not consulted about the November policy, even though it was going to devastate loads of women's lives and their children. The practice, the actual behavior, policies, choices of the leadership has still been extremely controlling and extremely patriarchal. So this change is happening at grassroots level. It gives hope. I hope that the leadership take it on board. They do like things that work at a grassroots level. If they work, they will. That is a way to influence change in the church. You can take that route.
Yeah.
But are they really
Been,
going to do this? Are they?
I mean, what
Give
I'm
women more
loving is
voice.
that women
Yeah.
are claiming it not under any authority other than as women. So, the At Last She Said It, there's another, I'm going to give a shout out to Carla, who organises the Untamed and Nuanced book group, which has got huge. These are discussions that happen online that are very safe, that are very supportive, that are very nuanced, that are honest, and that I stay up till till 4:30 in the morning to participate in, because they are that good. That is where I want to be. That is where, if every woman in the church was getting to have that experience, the same with the firesides that you'd mentioned, they are that good. They remind you of all that is good and inspiring about being a member of the church. It's brilliant stuff. And what I find really interesting is that when these surveys are going out and they are being read, women predominantly are saying, look, the home church program, it's not stimulating, it's increasing our burdens. They're being very honest about it. That when we are talking about the fact that most people aren't coming to church, most young people aren't coming to church because of LGBTQ issues, and that now that's probably the top reason for older people as well. The history, the truth claims, all of these things are taking a backseat to it. We're just not being kind to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. And so if we're at a point where we are taking that time to say, okay, we need to talk about this, we need to start having these conversations and just look at what can be. And that really excites me. So if we're making changes, okay, but what can be? What's going to be next?
We could inspire people. I just want to, someone mentioned the Alpha course earlier, and I said that I taught it. Yes, as Doug said, a lot of the things we're used to as programs in the church did start as grassroots movement. That is a way to influence change, to just do something and do it well. Although there are severe limits on that if you're actually going to challenge the leadership more assertively. But so the Alpha course, I thought this is a great example of Mormons teaching the rest of Christianity something. We've always had missionary discussions. They've not been perfect, but we have had a machine for encountering people, talking about our church, guiding them through an education process, at the end of which they're invited to join our religion. And in the face of extreme decline of congregations in the Church of England, in particular in Britain, a bunch of people got together and created what's called the Alpha course. And it's much more long and convoluted than our simple 6 discussions. It goes on for several weeks. It is a course, though, and it's designed around comfortable conversations where you invite people to hear a very short presentation of information, maybe 20 minutes, and you follow it with a meal and allow for just dialogue with Christians. And they have a youth version, a junior Alpha course. So when I revived Christian Union at my school, I just got hold of that and used that as the teaching curriculum. So every week we get together and do one of these lessons from this course. It was very good. And there was, it was like seeing maybe, when we talk about the future, I think this could inspire us. The Church of England was staring death in the face. They'd made the fatal error of spending many, many years pandering to the elderly, reliable ladies and men who turn up to church every Sunday and do the flowers and clean and sort the garden, but didn't want to change anything. They didn't want to change worship style. They totally uninterested in mission work. They just wanted to preserve everything as a little museum until they die. And so they lost their kids. They alienated their children. The children stopped coming. It was no longer relevant worship or anything to them. And as soon as that generation died, across Britain, church after church after church abandoned and closed. So this was an effort by the evangelical wing of the Church of England, based at Holy Trinity, Brompton, to actually say, no, we need to be assertive missionaries now. We need to save our church. We need to be relevant to the young. We need modern dynamic worship services. We're going to do an alpha course. We're going to train people. We're going to create something that can be replicated everywhere. And suddenly outside all of these different Christian denominations, churches, you had alpha courses being taught here, and they had a coordinated effort. And I was like, yeah, we taught them that. We got other stuff. We got manuals, people. You don't need to spend a year doing a theology degree to teach Sunday school and run your church. We can give you manuals, which I used to think were terrible, but now I realize how powerful they can be if they're good. So I loved that. But that they realized they were facing meltdown and did something about it. And this is what I'm arguing, and you're arguing, and all these people are arguing that our church needs to do. Now we are facing exactly the same meltdown. For too long, we have just not rocked the boat. We've not been honest about our history because we don't want to upset the elderly faithful. They've got to set the agenda because they're reliable. They're not very good missionaries, but they just want to keep things as they are. And as soon as you say anything in a Mormon lesson, or that's in any way difficult for them to hear because it's the real history that no one ever told them, or just we need to be nice to gay people, they shut you down very quickly. You're bringing in contention. You must be from Satan because the leaders have told them to react to any kind of dissent that way. And that people who try to be the change get fed up and leave because it just seems like they don't want to save themselves. And we're now in a situation where we're just waiting for those diehards to die, and then we'll sell our Mormon chapels. And we're down to less than 15% of our members. So what I'm saying, and others are saying, is we're in that crisis now. What are we going to do? Church of England stepped up. They made the Alpha course. They revamped their worship. They made a serious effort to survive. It hasn't worked because they didn't go far enough. And I read a Telegraph article that the Church of England is facing decimation after COVID, which we might be as well. And the average congregation size of the Church of England now is 27 people, which is where we're going quite quickly.
It is.
So my view is, yes, let's wake up. We're in crisis. We're in the end game. Are we going to do anything? Are we going to respond to the scale of this? Yeah. And but the scale of stuff we have to fix is really quite epic. It's a lot. It's generations of this kind of messaging to women and silencing them and saying your value is only as a wife and a mother in this particular lifestyle pattern. It is so many things. If you're just going to look objectively at what young people are going to stay in our church for, what will have to happen, it is the big three. Ordain women, apologize for the racism, like completely repudiate it, which Dan Oakes isn't doing. He's still saying it was God's idea. We just don't know why, because he can't cope with prophets being wrong for 150 years. And we must be LGBTQ inclusive. Racism should be easy to sort out. I don't know why he's hanging on to that. They've got the gospel.
Yesterday was the 43rd anniversary of the restoration, as the sisters in Zion put it, the restoration of the priesthood
and temple. Yeah.
And so you know, that I love that we have our brothers and sisters of color who are reminding us that this is painful and that this is important and that we need to still be talking about this, because
And it
these
has
are
not been ever apologized for, ever.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's still being gaslit, you know, and excuses made for it. Well, I said I don't know why. I know why. You know, Dallin Oaks and co are teaching that they are infallible. It's very clear about that. You talk to any member of the church, they're like, oh no, of course we don't believe our prophets are infallible. But they do. They believe it, and they're teaching it, and they've told us it's a sin to think or speak of our leaders as having human weakness. Henry B. Eyring taught that in The Power of Sustaining Faith a few years ago in conference. So that is the line they're trying to hold. And it will take any sacrifice. They will sacrifice looking ridiculous over race to hold that line. It can't possibly be that we racially segregated for 150 years, all those prophets, they can't all have been wrong. So they can't, in holding the line of their infallibility, which is unrealistic, they are holding that position. It's still an unfinished business. But perhaps more urgently in lots of ways is the LGBTQ inclusion and not ordaining women yet and not treating them equally and going back to a very old-fashioned rhetoric about women. Now, if we know that, as you said, this is the reason most given by young people who cannot stand what's being taught by our church, and increasing amounts of older members, which we all know, and I can speak to that myself. You just have to do some strategic thinking. As soon as possible, we need to ordain women, be LGBTQ included. We will have gay marriages in temples, and start getting your head around that, because it creates a mental car crash for people who've grown up in the church as it's traditionally imagined itself. But somehow we have to get from here to there, and most people in the Utah bubble think they've got decades to do it. They think they have all the time in the world, and you know, eventually these fuddy-duddy apostles will die, and then there'll be more woke ones, and eventually we'll just do it maybe in 40 years. We're like, our wards won't be here in 5 years. They won't be here in 10 years. There will be no international church. Most of your children will have left by then. So the time frame changes everything. The urgency. It's already, realistically, it's already too late. The church in Europe is toast. It will cease to exist in 15 to 20 years. But if they want to save it, and everyone at every level in our church needs to get their heads around this fast, it's this year the change has to happen, and next year, and the year after, the next 3 or 4 years. After that, there's no kids left. There's no kids left. And what happened to the Church of England that we in Britain have witnessed, and this is the witness we can give to the Utah church, is we've already watched this happen all around us. Hardly anyone goes to church anymore. They're just starting this process. It's literally only a few years ago that they started tipping below 40 or 50% of Americans going to church every week, you know. They're just starting to have the crash, but the rest of the Western world did this like in the 1930s or whatever. They need to learn from our lesson. They think they've got decades, they don't. It can all go really fast. It can just in the Church of England used to seem like an invincible institution in our country. It's our state religion. If the Archbishop of Canterbury had an opinion that contradicted the Prime Minister, it was headline news because he influenced a lot of people. They had power. They had numbers. Nothing now. It's tumbleweeds. They have no influence in our country whatsoever left. And Doug Vincent, who's in the Deep South, there is he's where I serve my mission. He's saying in the non-Utah wards in the South, it's down to about 20%, which is our technical numbers, but that doesn't include the address unknown file, which brings it down to 15%. So I just can't. I can't say enough. Obviously, I keep repeating it. I'm so sorry for that. But there's this time frame. There's this urgency.
And
we can't wait decades. It has to happen now.
And this is why
gone.
when you speak about the urgency, this is why I just kind of, are you hearing this, people? Are, you,
Yeah.
are our
Yeah.
leaders hearing this? American members of the church, are you hearing this? I totally agree with your analysis. This is also what we're seeing in Scotland too. Church of Scotland is sort of slightly different from Church of England, but churches here, the Church of Scotland, Church of England, are also revitalising themselves by they are driving the food bank programs. It's a very the sort of umbrella organisation who are sort of running most of the UK food banks. Is a Christian organisation, and this is how they're sort of switching their ministry to service.
Community
It's a
action. Yeah.
It's a so they're not so much concerned with what's happening on a Sunday, although of course they are. They're sort of seeing that church happens when we're out serving, and that's really exciting. And I guess that's where sort of I'm coming from, is this idea of what can be, what needs to change, what are the possibilities, all of the questions that Joseph and that Oliver were asking back in the day, where we could have someone who's starting a young men's program to educate, and he plays around with gender IDs, and none of these things are threatening. We're just looking at what is possible.
And weirdly, I think our situation is the reverse of that. That they have a very strong and sorted theology, but needed to be seen to be doing more community action, and the food bank to support where people can go and just get food if they are poor. This is to explain to our non-British audience, is a network where people, all kinds of churches involved. Ours is involved. My congregation has done a lot to contribute. Where people just give food to these depots, and people can register with them if they're really struggling financially and go and get food and at least have a meal on the table. And I think our issue is we've always been great at that. Our welfare system, when we do it right, kicks butt. We have always been really good at supporting our needy members. Not so much outside the church in the community, but I don't feel bad about that because there's so few of us. There's not enough of us to really do that. We need to look after our own. If we can do extra, that's lovely, and they can do that more in larger Utah congregations. But we've always been okay with the service side of things. We know how to serve. But what I would say the answer is, we need to sort out what we're teaching on the Sunday.
Yes.
That our challenge for the future is the messaging has got to change. We've got to stop being this incredibly backward-looking, extremely judgmental, sexually shaming of the teenagers for any thoughts they have to do with their puberty, and which alienates the young. But the doctrine, what is the message? What do people actually experience on a Sunday? Oh, you're not wearing a dress. You aren't dressed in a tie and a white shirt. You don't look like us. And it's some wards Jesus doesn't get a look in anymore. It's just profit, 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 profit. In general conference, the apostles and prophets very rarely quote scripture anymore. They're nearly always quoting each other. They're not theological thinkers, frankly. They just aren't. They're business managers and lawyers. That is their training, most of them, and the occasional surgeon, which also is irrelevant to running a religion. And here I'm comparing them with these great minds that got Mormonism through the 20th century, that helped it recover from polygamy and be relevant in the modern age. They were scientists. They were educators. Hugh B. Brown was an educator. John A. Whitsoe and Talmage were scientists. And they had stuff to say that rivets your attention. And it was inspiring. It was mind expanding. It was picking up on what Joseph Smith and Brigham Young taught about having this omnivorous hunger for any knowledge from anywhere, and being fearless about it and being willing to change. And again, if we had that view, it would fix so much of our disillusion and faith crisis issues. Because one of the sort of key disruptive messaging that comes from skeptics is Joseph Smith kept changing his mind about doctrine. He actually re-edited the Book of Mormon, the church did, to take out the Trinitarian bits when he evolved his theology of the Godhead to be non-Trinitarian. And the lectures in faith, which used to be in the Doctrine and Covenants and were part of the Temple Endowment, also very Trinitarian, very traditional Trinitarian Christian language about the nature of God. That all got taken out when we became assertively not Trinitarian. And that's seen as they hid the truth, they lied, they changed the doctrine. No, let's embrace that. They learned.
Right.
They had revelations. They got a clearer idea. They came across better ways to frame this stuff. They brought this bizarre idea of the philosophical Trinity back down to earth. It turns out they developed the idea that we are the same species of God. You can't have a Trinity in that situation. You have to, people have their own bodies, we're still not there with what or who the Holy Ghost is. That really doesn't fit. And I'm quite intrigued about the feminist Mormon narrative that maybe the Holy Spirit is Heavenly Mother. We could work with that. But if we have this shift to which, again, just as we used to be able to cope with the cross-dressing founder of the Young Men's Program, we used to have a religion that was fearless about any new ideas that came along. Let's have the battle of ideas, the marketplace of ideas. Hugh B. Brown told the BYU students in his speeches that you can find on the BYU website, you need to seek truth. You need to learn everything you can, rely on evidence and facts. You are going to have to battle for your ideas in the marketplace of ideas. You have to compete. And we therefore need to practice. We need to practice at church, discussing all the different counter arguments and beliefs, not regard that as someone being satanic and faithless and dangerous and testimony destroying. We need to get used to having robust dialogue to justify beliefs or chuck them for something better. Otherwise, we can't do it when we go out into the world. And Joy D. Jones got up in the last conference telling parents to train their children to do this intellectual combat with their teachers and peers if they dare to say anything that's different to church doctrine. What happened to tolerating people's right to believe how, where, or what they may? No, our little kids have to go and be argumentative and tell them they're wrong. But they'll be so rubbish at it because Mormons don't train themselves. The parents don't know how to have these discussions. They don't know how to maintain a robust argument against counter arguments because they're not allowed to practice at church. So it's just this one thing, this mental shackle. If we could just shift back to the original, in my view, the original Mormonism, which very clearly taught, not just by Brigham and Joseph, but by these titanic apostles through the 21st century, John A. Widtsoe as well, through the 20th century. These people got it, and they had a bulletproof religion because even when they were proved wrong, they were grateful. They were like, thank you for telling me that was a stupid idea. Let's replace it with a better one, because that's what Mormonism does. We're on a really long journey to become like God. That's the religion that excites me. That's the religion that has a future. That's the religion that can deal with any skeleton in its past. All of it. Joseph Smith's terrible sins and crimes. We can deal with that by not pretending that they didn't happen. Just learn from them. Yes, he screwed up badly. Let's not make that mistake. We can learn from it. We're moving on. Hold on to what is good. Get rid of what doesn't survive. Jesus taught this. Why can't we do that? And the women are stepping up and showing us what the future could look like if they were just allowed to have a voice and control the agenda of what they're teaching.
Absolutely.
And the nerdy men are doing the same.
A few years ago, I remember reading about a thought experiment where if you could plug into if you could plug into a machine that would sort of let you have experiences and this, by plugging into this machine, you would effectively be able to parachute, you'd be able to go to all these wonderful places, have these incredible adventures. It would be your neurology that's sort of you're plugging your brain into this thing. But would you choose to plug in or not? And it sounds like, we can have lots of fun sort of thinking about that idea. But I feel like when we go to church on a Sunday or when we sit in gospel discussions, we're effectively plugging ourselves into a machine. We're not living it. We're not experiencing it. We're not ourselves experiencing it. It would always be plugging into a machine. It will never be me that has that experience. So some part of my consciousness will have had it, but it wouldn't be me. And what it really excites me about the possibilities and thinking about what can be is the thought that I don't have to just experience church on this basic level, experience God on this basic level, that we can try new things and get things wrong, and that I can experience it with my whole being. That expansion of my mind, it's, we talk about it in the Doctrine and Covenants. How am I going to church every Sunday and having a stupor of thought because it's so boring and there's nothing to think about anymore?
I mean, it can be difficult to make a story out of the Doctrine and Covenants. I've been reading the Quran. It's really boring because it's a bit like the Doctrine and Covenants. It's not a journey. It's Muhammad's teachings about lots of topics, which in its own way is absolutely fascinating and deep and interesting. But there isn't a narrative. There's no, and then the prophet went up a mountain and this miracle happens, And our Doctrine and Covenants has some history going on, which is getting into the curriculum. But it tends to be more, it's just explaining stuff in doctrinal statements. And it can be tough. But then watch Naked Mormonism. My gosh, we wouldn't be losing teenage boys from our church if they were getting the real history of these wacky gunslinging, murdering, crazy people. It's gripping. It's absolutely fascinating if you just stop being terrified about anyone not looking like an old Utah prophet,
Exactly. And
one of the quotes from Hugh B. Brown that I loved was, he said, God doesn't want us to become merely the tape recorders of other people's thoughts.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you just said. Why can't we think for ourselves? Why are we just repeating like parrots a really dumbed down curriculum? I'm a teacher. I've a right to say this. The intellectual challenge of the Come Follow Me manual is sub-elementary school. We teach in average education systems, we teach a much more sophisticated approach to learning and analysis and thought to 9 and 10-year-olds than is allowed for in that manual. I mean, it's horrific. And we've got such a rich religion with such big ideas, with great mind-expanding stuff. We've got tons of juicy scriptures to chew on. Our modern history is just hysterical and fascinating and inspiring and startling. Every Sunday should be like a roller coaster ride at Thorpe Park, But it's
I think
boring.
Alana's comment.
Boring.
You're right, and Alana's comment here that before lockdown, I was there in body, but my brain was not switched on, and we're kind of chuckling about that, but that's the experience most people are having, and what happens with someone who is really there to have a spiritual experience is they leave thinking there's something wrong with them. Alana, feels that would feel that there was something wrong there, and having to. Naked Mormonism it's kind of antagonistic. Bryce will just call out what he thinks is
great nicknames for people, so you
right. He does, and that's helped me remember church history better than anything else has. And yet, I find it more stimulating, more engaging. I'm able to sift that out because it's because it's so
real.
Because
it's our
real.
lives. Our families are that messed up. Our community is that crazy. We do dumbass things all the time, and we're in
that's the people that God is working with, then there is a chance for me. Lindsay Hanson Park in the Sunstone Mormon History podcast is, there's also some great stuff coming out of that. I guess I just wanted, maybe we should wrap up and kind of get you back.
We're going to go in circles. But I think the great hope, as you've touched on, is the internet. This thing we're in, it's empowered us all. It's given us a voice. If we're not getting it at church, we can get it online. There are amazing people who love this religion. Even the people who've left it, loving it. Matt Allen commented earlier. He's kind of out or on his way out. But he said he's never been so interested in Mormon history. And because once you bite the real stuff, you get away from this filtered, ridiculously whitewashed, rose-tinted curriculum of nonsense to chew on the real stuff. which is slightly, I'm not even going to say it's in the curriculum. It isn't. It's there a few layers deep in the Gospel Library app. It is not in that manual. It just isn't. They're still hiding everything. And whatever they've been saying since 2013 when they released the Gospel Topics essays, they're still not in there. It's so much there. But so this is how my Mormonism survived. In the 1990s, I found Sunstone magazine. And that was my lifeline. It was, compared to an average website today, it was nothing, but it was like manna. It's like an oasis. Oh my gosh, people talking real history and discussing it, and it's exciting. Current affairs. The internet has multiplied that by a gabillion. So there's no need to be bored by Mormonism anymore. Just go online. There's people with podcasts and resources. There are so many people doing like an alternative come follow me curriculum because they're so utterly uninspired and bored by the official manual one. They're just looking at the same material, the same scriptures, and they're finding all the meat that's there, all the food, the intellectual and spiritual depth that is there to be mined in our religion if you'll stop being terrified. And all those resources there, and there are some of the better gospel doctrine teachers are just harvesting that and putting it in how they're teaching on a Sunday.
Exactly.
Because they're not getting it from the official resources. And the church just needs to wake up to this instead of just demonizing everyone out there as somehow the enemy. This is what's keeping some people going to church. It's the bloggernacle that's kept me loving my religion and engaged with it and keen to turn up every Sunday, even though what's happening on a Sunday is mostly dreck. I love my people, and it's not their faults. This is the curriculum and the traditions and the ways of doing things that they're given, and that has become entrenched. But I am, to some extent, a lot of the more feisty intellectual brains that used to be there in my wards, they've gone now. They're the first to leave the pit. So you get left with people who, for whatever reason, that's totally fine for them, are not intellectually curious, do not want to learn new things each week. They are there for safety. It's a cuddly blanket. It's a comfort blanket. It's the lullabies of their childhood. They just want to hear the same answers to the same questions year after year, feel reassured. I'm in the true church. We have the truth. I know all the answers. McConkie Mormonism, we got everything explained. There's nothing more to learn, really. And I feel good and I'm going home.
And yet, these same people who, when they have an experience where they are taught something stimulating, exciting, or a perspective that they haven't heard before, that meets
they love
with suddenly they come alive. It's really exciting. In a few weeks, I'm so excited.
Let's switch them on. Let's switch them on. I believe in it. I believe in good teaching. I'm so glad you said that, because I've been a gospel doctrine teacher and I've kind of laid it all out there. And usually it's like, oh, that was so good, Peter. It was really interesting. You got me thinking, because I wasn't saying the same thing over and over again. It's not hard to do that. So I do believe in the transformative effect. But when I'm in a situation now where I'm less likely to get any backup, where I'm the only person always saying the difficult thing and the thing that upsets people or makes them think outside the box, it becomes very lonely, because I know perfectly well in other wards or in the past in our own wards, nothing I said there would have been controversial because there'd have been other people joining in, and that's where the center of gravity is. But now I'm the only one. I just look like I'm there to make trouble every week. And some people react, they think they're just to shut me down as quickly as possible, and then bear their testimony because I've obviously chased the spirit away. And so they're not allowing that voice to happen. They're not allowing the voice that could inspire them. I'm not saying it's just me, but the knowledge, the information, the perspectives that are in our real history. And that all sets them up for faith destruction, because in the moment they eventually stumble across the Gospel Topics essay or the CES letter or a website and actually start to learn the real history of the church, it all comes crashing down, because no one prepared them for any of it. And they've just spent the last 5 years telling everyone who tried to prepare them to shut up, because you're chasing the spirit away and you're upsetting the new members, and you might damage someone's testimony because this is something different to what we've all heard before. even though what they're saying is so boring that will kill a testimony far faster than something that's controversial.
Yeah.
It's so,
Peter,
and so that's the struggle we're in, isn't it?
yeah, I want to come back and sort of finish off
Mm,
by asking you a question,
mm,
but just for our audience, so
mm,
thank you for all the lovely concern about Alana.
mm,
She
yeah,
is fine, but a bit unwell. So
mm,
we're giving her the week off, and she will be back. We all do miss her very much. So thanks for those thoughts. I know that she really appreciates it. Um,
mm.
in a few weeks, we're going to have some amazing guests coming on. We've got.
You started amazing. Jane Chrissy, your first episode was with Papa Osler, and you've already had John DeLynn. I mean, my
Oh, wait
gosh,
and see
is there
where we
anyone
go.
left?
We have the most amazing
Yeah.
Old Testament scholar. It sounds
Ooh.
potentially it could sound so boring to people who have not heard this guy speak. It is going to blow your mind. You are going to
Does he,
love this. You're going
does
to
he
want
have a
to
big
share.
does he have a big beard?
Does he? I think he has a beard. He has a
Okay.
very cool voice. We also want
Yeah.
to get him recorded for some ASMR. And yeah. Anyway, you're gonna love him. We've got some incredible guests coming up. Before we finish off, because I know that our guests, our audience will be wanting to know. And Richard's question there: where's the space for faithful disagreement? Peter, we want to know how you're doing. How are you getting on, friend?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So obviously, as you've mentioned before, I've been called to a court of love, stake membership council, on charges of apostasy, specifically for opposing the leaders. And my first sort of response was to request the full High Council there, which has been granted. So, but that has then meant a delay to the end of June for it now. So that we can get everyone in the same room, because at the moment, 21st of July is the date that we're meant to ease up some of our social distancing rules with COVID and laws. There's some talk that might get delayed now, which might delay the trial even further. But either way, so I think, and I know last time when we spoke, you asked how I felt, and I'm a bit too male brained. I'm not very good at talking about my feelings about things. I've kind of backtracked a bit, and I need to, it is a betrayal. I've given this church 50 years of my life. I love it. It's just ridiculous to that someone who's trying to save it in my own way, whatever I can. I mean, as I said, if I have a Messiah complex, it's because the church told us all to have one. We're here to save everyone, and take responsibility. But I'm trying my best to have an honest, faith-based analysis of the larger picture and what we're going to need to do. And I've paid my dues. I've suffered. My family is not active anymore. My immediate family and other relatives of mine have dropped out. People I love dearly, people I taught in primary, as I mentioned earlier, have gone on the journey and they couldn't stick with it, not because they were wrong or there's anything wrong with them, but their integrity, the values we taught them in primary, meant they could no longer be participating in a church culture that just lies to them so much or causes so much harm or hurts their LGBTQ friends and themselves if they are, that still has so much sexist messaging and treating women as third-class citizens after men and boys. And I've just experienced pain after devastation, after loss, after disappointment for years and years. And so when people ask me how I feel now, I'm more focused on I'm livid, I'm absolutely freaking heavily angry, and I'm doing something about it. And my focus tends to be action now. What is it going to take? What's the best shot we've got? I'm going to do it. Let's just do what we can in this mess, work out how power works in our church, map out what the change needs to be, which you've been doing brilliantly. And so I'm very kind of focused in that track. And in a way, my pain and suffering happened a while ago. I've adjusted to not expecting anything else from the church. So really, my main goal is try not to get angry and upset at the individuals choosing to do this, because it's about the system and the system they've been taught. So I'm trying to keep it serene and not get bitter and twisted. It's not a surprise at all, because the church has removed any allowance. As someone posted, it popped up a little earlier, where is the safe space for robust dialogue or for different views in the church? There isn't one. There just isn't. They've changed all the rules. The latest handbook of instructions makes it an automatic apostate trial if you even oppose church policies. Policies, not doctrine, not leaders, policies, some minor thing. If I say, I think it's ridiculous that the new handbook of instructions says we have to take the sacrament with our right hands, and I say that publicly, I could be excommunicated and cast into outer darkness, my temple marriage cancelled, my priesthood cancelled, my membership in the church I love gone. You can't dissent about anything at all, unless it's theological. You can say, I'm really not sure who Jesus was. You can mess with pretty much any doctrine, frankly. No one's going to put you on trial because you have issues with whether, to what extent was Jesus a god or some other theological issue. You can believe what you want, kind of. But the minute you criticize the leaders and say they're getting something wrong or they are the problem, down comes the hammer. There is zero tolerance of any kind in our church now for anything that even sounds like it might be that. So I'm determined. I'm resolute. I'm not afraid, and it's very liberating to stop fearing these people. If they do excommunicate me, I think they've got a lot more to worry about than me at the pearly gates, because it's unrighteous dominion. And the scriptures are very clear that as soon as you abuse power, you don't have priesthood authority anyway. Amen to the priests of that man. So it's quite liberating not to be in a state of fear. I'm not going to grovel. I will be making the best case I can to stay. I want to stay. And I do believe that they will give me a fair hearing. I think they are people of integrity, and they are going to listen and be thoughtful. I do trust that. But the outcome is highly likely to be excommunication, of course. But so my mind's just on bit, and I've got it easy. This is easy, because if they don't do the things I and you and others are suggesting, there's no stake anyway. What am I being excommunicated from? I will have no ward to go to. Their stake will be erased. Their children won't be at church anymore. Plenty of the men sitting around that table will have had a faith crisis and gone, probably before me. So my game plan now is to be one of the last 12 Mormons left in the world and become an apostle, because there'll be no one else turning up. That's my backup. I've got a safety net.
You deal with everything with such grace and humor, but I just want to acknowledge that we do, as Richard says here in the comments, it's his heart
That's very sweet.
has for you. I am seeing stages of grief. This is not what anyone wants, and I just wanted to just honor how difficult a time this is.
Yeah. My anger phase has been going on for ages now, and I'm really enjoying it. So this is a great phase in the stages of grief, if you can channel it into action. One of the things my mum always taught me is anger is an energy. If you don't get angry about things, you don't change them. It's a valid emotion. It's something Jesus did a lot. He was livid. He was hopping mad with what the Pharisees did to his religion, and he was very happy to say so and flip some tables. So great role model. It is. And I think my sense of loss, though, has been very gradual. And I've been lucky, because I started young as an apologist, dealing with anti-Mormon literature as a teenager, going on a mission to the Bible Belt, very involved in Christian Union at college afterwards, in which I was discriminated against because of being a Mormon. And then engaging in lots of dialogue with people with boxes full of anti-Mormon books. So I got super lucky before the internet that I was able to know, by no means all of it. We've all learned some crazy stuff over the last few years. But I was able to get a head start in being inoculated, in being exposed to difficult, accurate history, but also supported by communities like Sunstone through the Sunstone magazine, where Mormons who love this religion were processing it and providing a way to frame it and still be faithful and hopeful and positive about the future. So I got super lucky. If I'd had it all at once, like so many people do now with the internet, there's no way. I don't know how I'd have handled that. And I've got such empathy for and respect for the people who've encountered this all at once when it took me years to just about cope with it. And the church has got to wake up and be realistic about how catastrophic that is, and that they did this to us, and they're going to have to do a lot of apologizing to neutralize the sting of that betrayal, you know, which people have been telling them for years, but of course they're still not listening. But we keep filling in our surveys.
Keep filling them in.
You know, I know, and so much support, just wonderful letters being written to support me and messages of support. That has been brilliant, and I just might thank you everyone, because it has been wonderful. You know, just that's really strengthened and validated and supported me. So I've been very, 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 very lucky and loved, you know, through this process, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, that means a lot to me.
Before we say goodbye to Peter and to the audience, I want to just give a shout out to our fellow Brit vendors. So we've got Nemo is going to be podcasting live on Sunday at 8. So
wow.
Let's be there for that. He acquitted himself very well last week with on Mormonism Live. He did an awesome job. His memes are making their way around the internet, so that's fun. We're going to have Sunstone UK coming up in September, so you can catch some information about that on the Sunstone UK Facebook page, where the Heaths will be happy to tell you what you can do. We will be there. We're going to come hang out, so it will be good to see as many of you there as possible. What else? We're waiting for episode 7 from you, Peter.
Yeah, no, the good one. So episode 6F, which is my last looking at thought control and so on, it's going to be quite a tough one. I'm going to look at the BITE model, which is the objective criteria for a dangerous mind control cult, and seeing how we come out of that little encounter. But also lots of positives with looking at the teaching of John A. Widtsoe, who was actually a huge support to my great-grandmother, who was the only member of the church in Ceylon for years. And John and his wife Leah corresponded with her and gave her a lot of support, and were kind of her internet group through post. And so I love him, and I'm really excited to learn more about his teachings, which are quite similar to Hugh B. Brown's that I've covered. And then episode 7, which I'm all hoping to get out before the trial, is going to be just all the good stuff. And I hope people have heard some of that from what I've said today. This amazing, future capable, open-minded, science-loving, research-embracing, robust, fearless Mormonism is what we've got, or what we used to have, and we need to rediscover that. And then we can take the 21st century. I genuinely believe in Mormonism's destiny, not just to fix the fundamental flaws in mainstream Christianity, of which there are several that we do address really powerfully, but also to be a credible world religion, which seems ludicrous, you know, even to some members now, and never mind people who have sort of gone off it all a bit. But if we bring together all our best bits, they are amazing. There is meat there is theology, there are big ideas, sometimes not worked out in huge books, but they're very simple ideas, but they are powerful. They are game-changing, mind-expanding ideas. Our purpose is to become gods and goddesses. I mean, what could be more inspiring and empowering than that? And it matches the science. The Hubble telescope. We're in a visible galaxy, a visible universe, which could be one of how many universes, with 2 trillion galaxies in it. And each of those galaxies has several 100 billion habitable planets. I mean, the scale of the universe that we know is there and we can look at. Why are we looking at people's hemlines on a Sunday? Why are we looking at the color of their shirt and how many earrings they have? Why are we bothered about the language they use when they pray, when you could look up and see 2 trillion galaxies waiting to be lived in, created in? That is our destiny. And how significant is it that Joseph Smith said that a lot of his first religious awakenings occurred looking at the night sky?
Mm-hmm.
He looked at that universe and he started thinking about the possibilities. And that in many ways was the beginning of his journey to a religion for the space age and the information age. That's
So
what we're sitting on, not freaking homophobia and racist garbage. And that was never meant to be our destiny. And disempowering women, when Eve is presented in the temple as the first avatar of Christ, taking on death to save all mankind, choosing to get out of her comfort zone. For what? For salvation? No. For knowledge. For knowledge, to know more, to become more. That's the baseline of our religion, not kowtowing obedience to grandparents in Utah who just think like all the other white grandparents in America. You know, just that this is our religion. Our religion. We look at the stars and we're going to go there, and we've already filled it with a rational explanation for why it's even so big, because of all the gods that are there, and we're going to join them. And whether you see that as real or even a metaphor, just the metaphor of that is inspiring. It's saying, it's Star Trek. It's saying humanity's destiny is in the stars, and we can bring people together. We can unite the planets. We can have virtuous values at the core of everything we do. We can be heroes. We can make our world better and kinder and more inclusive. And we can do that in our family, in our hearts, and we can do it in the whole universe. How on earth can you take that religion and make it so utterly, utterly boring on a Sunday? There is no excuse for this ridiculous travesty.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Anyway,
Thank you so
there'll be
much.
some of that in episode 7.
Wait for episode 7. I'm really excited about it. We've already teased what we've got coming up over the next few weeks, so we will keep you all informed on our Facebook and YouTube pages. We are excited to be able to announce over the next couple of weeks our new social media manager is bringing us out some merch. We're going to have some t-shirts, people. So there's lots that's happening. We're really excited to tell you about it. Peter, thank you. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
We love you, Alana. Get well soon. And I know that on behalf of Alana and our audience, we want to say thank you so much, Peter. We love you, we support you, we stand with you, and we bless your journey. So with that, good night, everyone, and we'll see you again in the next episode.
Bye-bye. Night-night, everyone.